Alright y'all, welcome back to the channel and to some more home defense testing. And today we've got a shell that one of you guys wanted to see us try in this scenario, and I definitely wanted to test it as well to see what it could do, because it could give us some very interesting results. But as for the shell we're going to run today, I brought out some of the Herter's 12 gauge buckshot loads. They're technically a hunting load since the Herter shells are made by Winchester. They are essentially a Winchester Super X shell, just in a different box. But they're a 12 gauge 2 3/4 inch 9 pellet load of double aught buck moving 1325 feet per second. So all the same specs and everything as a Super X load, and they tend to perform like one as well when it comes to patterns. But these are more of a hunting oriented buckshot load. So how can they do as far as a home defense scenario? Are we going to be able to get very nice and tight patterns, or are they kind of just going to scatter all over the place on us? They're a relatively basic, cheaper load as well. I think a box of 10 of these is like $7.99 or something like that, so they're not bad compared to some options, but we'll see what they can do. But as for the setup we're going to run them through, I brought out the good old Remington 870. It's got an 18.5 inch barrel on it, cylinder bore, so no choke at all. Very much your classic home defense type of setup here, short barreled 870. So we're going to run those hunting oriented shells through a setup that they probably weren't really designed or intended for in the first place anyway, but we'll see what they can do. But as for today's test, we're going to run it the same as we usually do for these home defense scenarios. We're going to take 5 shots ranging from 7 to 25 yards. So 7, 10, 15, 20, and 25, all of which will be through the chrono as well, so we can get our velocity from them through this much shorter barrel. I would imagine we're going to see somewhere between a flight control and a very cheap import shell as far as our pattern goes. So that's my guess right off the bat. Pretty middle of the road, but let's take our shots and actually see what a more hunting oriented shell might be capable of in a defensive scenario. Alright, so let's take a quick peek at our velocities before we look at our targets. Boss claim is 1325. However, we only have an 18.5 inch barrel, so we did not see that. However, we did see some pretty decent velocity out of them. We had 1273, 1246, 1273, 1279, and 1301 for an average at 1274. So roughly 50 feet per second under the boss claim. That definitely makes sense. And as far as recoil goes, they are your average buckshot load. If you've shot Super X, then these are the same way. They're not a low recoil shell, but they're not as bad as a 3-inch Magnum 15 pellet load or something like that. So they are manageable, but they aren't a low recoil shell either if you're worried about that in your defensive style shotgun. But now let's head over to our targets and see how they actually patterned. Alright, so now let's take a look at our targets, and it's rather interesting. We'll start out at 7 and 10 yards here, over here at our 7-yard paper, all 9 of them right through center mass, and it gave us a 5.5 inch spread, so very much so effective there, but it's not quite as tight as what we had seen from something like a Federal Flight Control or a Hornady Critical Defense shell. Those were between 2 and 3 inches, so a little bit more open, but that's still a very nice, even pattern that I wouldn't hesitate to use. Now moving over to our 10-yard intruder here, we still kept all 9 pellets within center mass. The big strikes you see there are the wad strikes, so kind of ignore those for now, but we did open it up to 8 3/4 inches. Still kept all 9 pellets within the center mass of the intruder there, and within the same room. Absolutely good enough to get the job done, no doubt about it. I wouldn't want to be on the other end of it. And initially here, it's kind of looking like my hypothesis coming into it here might be about what we're going to see. Not as tight as a dedicated defense shell, but not as open as a very cheap, very basic import style buckshot load either. This is pretty much right in the middle so far. But moving over here to our 15-yard target now, we still kept all 9 pellets within the intruder there. We did open it up a little more to 12 3/4 inches, but we still kept the same nice even spread of pellets. There's really no flyers or anything in there. There's no big voids or anything. Absolutely capable of getting the job done, but we're starting to see these open up a little bit. 12 3/4 inches is still not bad. It's better than a cheap import load, but it's definitely not holding anywhere near the spread that we typically see from a defensive load either. But for an average middle of the road buckshot load, I think that's a very effective middle of the road pattern performance there. I still wouldn't want to stand in front of that pattern, that's for sure. Now we'll move over here to our 20-yard paper, and we did continue our trend, opened it up to about 14 inches this time. Still kept a pretty even pattern, but the pellets are starting to spread out a little bit farther. Even though we only opened it up 1 1/4 inches over our 15-yard pattern, the pellets are kind of starting to straggle their way into little clumps, kind of 2 up there, 2, 2, and another couple down at the bottom. Still plenty good enough to get the job done. That's not a bad spread at all right there, but it's still floating right down the middle of the road. Not as good as a defense load, but much better than a cheap import load. At this point, it's probably starting to get a little bit wider than what I would personally like to see in my home defense shotgun, which is why I would use one of those Federals or Hornady shells, but still would be very effective. And now we'll move out to our 25-yard target. And here is where we really start to open it up. We moved up to 21 inches of spread there, and the pellets are starting to really kind of float their own separate ways. It's a relatively even spread, but you do start to get larger voids throughout the pattern since those pellets are farther apart. I might have been just a touch to the right on that one, but still at this distance with that kind of a pattern, you're going to start running the potential of having pellets that miss your intended target because your pattern is too broad and hit other things or other people that you don't want to hit. Now I know 25 yards is not your everyday occurrence, and yes, this would absolutely still get the job done, no doubt about it. But that is a factor to consider, especially if you live out in a more country type of setting where you've got outbuildings or something like that, where you may have to take a longer shot out across the backyard or whatever the case would be. So ultimately here today, I think I was about right. This is a very solid performance, but it's very middle of the road as well. Down here at closer ranges, absolutely good enough to get the job done, hands down. It's a nice even spread of pellets. It gives you a little more breathing room to work with while not scattering the pellets just everywhere quite as much as a cheaper import shell. But out here at 20 or 25 yards, you definitely start to run a little more risk of hitting stuff behind or next to your intended target. So overall, yes, these are absolutely effective shells. You can run them in your home defense setups and be perfectly fine. This is a very good standard middle of the road option that's not as expensive as a lot of your dedicated defense shells, and for some people this is about perfect for what they ask for. A cheaper shell that gives them a little bit more wiggle room while not having a pattern that's all over the place either. But you're going to have people on both sides of the fence here. There's going to be people that like it, and there's going to be people that want it a little tighter than that, and both are very valid opinions. But overall, I would say very much standard. This is probably what I would call the baseline for a regular old buckshot load in a home defense scenario. And here are a couple of the wads from that shell. Immediately, you can tell these are a Winchester load. And I mean, here's the hull from one. It's literally stamped Winchester right on it. So these are just a Winchester shell in a Herter's box. Either way, very basic design, nothing special. You can see the little dimples down there, and it does look like there's some dimples from buffer material as well. So these are probably buffered, but I don't believe they're plated. So I do think that the combination of having the wad and a little bit of buffer material in there does help them out over a very cheap import shell, but it is no flight control wad or Versatite wad or anything like that either. Again, very standard equipment, and I think it's probably about the baseline for your average buckshot load. All right, y'all. Well, what did you think about that performance right there? I think we've pretty well covered it at this point. It's going to be very effective. I wouldn't hesitate to use that if that's a shell that I had available to me at all. It's just a Super X shell that's in a different box. And the Super X shells have done the job in thousands of people's shotguns for decades now. So there's no reason why they can't still work perfectly fine. If you want a little bit cheaper shell that gives you a very middle of the road pattern, maybe a little more breathing room at closer ranges while not throwing pellets all over the place, this is a very decent option for you. It's not really a low recoil shell, and it doesn't have the super tight condensed spread that some of those more fancy or higher end or expensive defensive oriented shells actually can get. But this kind of performance is going to be what a lot of people kind of expect, or at least think of when they think home defense buckshot type of scenario. So overall, for a more hunting oriented loading, I don't think it did too bad. That's about what I expected to see. So leave all your thoughts down below. Is that about what you expected? Were you a little surprised one way or the other? Have you tested any of the Herters and or Super X shells in a home defense type of scenario like this? Are these or the Super X shells one that you would ever run in your home defense shotgun if you're getting patterns like that? Or would you prefer to see it a little tighter and stuff like you get from those more higher end defensive oriented shells? And what other shells do you want to see us run through that particular 870 with the shorter barrel on it? Let me know all that down below. But with that being said, I've got some more testing to get done for you guys, so I'm going to get back to it. As always, we have the channel Instagram as well as the mailbox where you can send stuff if you'd like. All the information will be in the description if you're interested in it, but I'm going to get back to it, so I'll see y'all in the next one.